A birthday breakfast like no other. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was just beginning celebrations when Thames Valley Police knocked on the door of his Sandringham cottage. A truly unprecedented moment. The King's brother arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office, and the first time a member of the royal family has been arrested for nearly 400 years. As we record, Andrew remains in custody as the world waits to see what happens next. So how did the police operation unfold? What are the next steps in this historic investigation? Will Andrew get any special treatment because of his royal status? In this special episode, we take you through the latest dramatic developments and look at where we go from here. Welcome to the Crime Agents. Welcome back to the Crime Agents with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, the ex-cop Neil Basu.
Momentous occasion this morning, Neil, when we saw a convoy of 5 4x4 vehicles approach Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's private estate in Sandringham. 8 detectives, I'm told, including an arresting officer. And he was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. It's right that we say at this stage that Andrew has always denied any criminality and any wrongdoing. Neil, it's one of those days. Where were you when? What were you doing when you heard the news?
I think I was having breakfast when you rang me up. I didn't have the news on, wasn't listening to the radio this morning. I was having a day off, I thought, Andy, thank you very much. But at least it wasn't my birthday. I mean, that's a bit of a shocker.
Indeed.
And I would also say, this is something that all media commentators, informers, influencers, whatever we call podcasters these days, we're not here to talk about guilt or innocence. We're here to talk about process and what's happened and why that's happened. So, yeah, it's very important to stress that, Andrew, and I heard your episode with Lewis on Peter Mandelson. At the end of the day, we're describing what's happened. We're not making a judgment on
Correct.
the result.
Yeah, absolutely no judgment, and there's nothing to read into.
But as you say, first time in 400 years. I think the last time a member of the royal family was arrested, it was Charles I.
Yeah, exactly.
Who later went on to be beheaded. So that's we'll have to do an episode on that now as well. But yeah, this is quite some day for Britain.
So the purpose of today, Neil, for the detective team of detectives is for a search. Really, they want to gather as much evidence as possible. What do we read into the fact that Andrew has been arrested and not invited in voluntarily?
Well, that's a pretty dramatic decision by Thames Valley Police. I sort of understand why they need to do that. They've certainly got the power to do that. I mean, as a detective, I always think the best course of action is an arrest and an interview. It's the best course of action for the suspect because their rights are read to them. They have the opportunity to have a solicitor present. What you don't want to do is be interviewing somebody under caution where they have the opportunity to leave at any time. Because what do you do if they decide to say, thanks very much, you've now disclosed your case to me, but I don't really want to answer any questions. I'm just going to get up and leave. Do you arrest them then? Yeah. So you've got them in under false pretenses? Yeah. So it says to me one thing very clearly, that they've examined the evidence over the last, I think it's about almost 2 weeks to the day since the allegations came out in the Epstein Files. They've had a look at those. They've certainly got reasonable grounds to suspect that a criminal offence has happened. And as soon as you've got those reasonable grounds, you've got the ability to arrest somebody under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. It's actually Section 24. But you can only do it if it meets the necessity test. And there's a whole series of tests that, for reasons why you might want to arrest someone. And probably the one that's most relevant in this is for the prompt and effective investigation of the case. Yeah. So one of the reasons is they're going to search looking for any kind of documentary records or electronic records or any kind of devices that might hold information that they might need to question Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor on. And
it was, as you say, just under 2 weeks ago. It was Friday, 2 weeks ago, when Thames Valley Police, they were the first force really to put a statement out after the release of the Epstein Files, saying they are assessing information in relation to misconduct in public office, and that at the time related to emails which showed correspondence between Jeffrey Epstein and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. And the allegations are that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor shared very confidential and sensitive information with Jeffrey Epstein that could have not only affected the UK markets but also made Jeffrey Epstein even richer. So those are the allegations, and he has been arrested today. What I'm fascinated by, really, is the process of arrest. Someone is arrested, they're taken into a custody suite, and the arresting officer then is asked by the custody sergeant to read out what the suspect has been arrested for. I just imagine being that custody sergeant today. Do you think he would have been given a little tip off that they've got a rather high profile suspect coming in?
He would have certainly been told, it will have been arranged, so he or she, the custody sergeant, would have been told that there is a high profile arrest. They would have chosen...
Would have been told that it was Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor?
Not necessarily, no.
Really?
Because, of course, the whole purpose of a custody sergeant is to be the objective opinion on whether the arrest is lawful and whether the grounds have been correctly given to the suspect, and then to make sure that the suspect has their rights. So telegraphing in advance who the suspect is and why they've been arrested would not really be correct procedurally. So I imagine they've just... What no senior investigating officer wants is a press circus around a custody suite where somebody's been taken in. So you want to make sure it's not telegraphed in advance. Any kind of... if you're a Thames Valley custody sergeant, you probably have a pretty good idea given what's all the speculation over the last 2 weeks. But you don't want any potential leak that would... And in my day, unfortunately, it's a truism that there were police officers and police staff who were willing to ring up the press. Yeah. And so I won't tell you whether you know anything about that at all, Andy, but there were people who were willing to ring up and say, and get paid a few quid to say, if you have a photographer waiting at this location at this time, you'll get a good picture of somebody.
Ironically, that is misconduct in public office.
It absolutely is, and I've arrested people for it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, well, there you go. What's also fascinating is when the cars started to arrive, obviously I got a few texts saying detectives at Sandringham, you start making your calls. I spoke to a couple of Met contacts. None of them had any idea that this was happening. And we also now know that the King or Buckingham Palace weren't informed either. Now, that's hardly a surprise, is it? Not only does it go against everything you're taught as a detective in terms of informing people that you're about to arrest them, that you're on their way, but also it would have put the King in an extremely difficult position, shall we say. I mean, imagine if this team of detectives had arrived there this morning and the suspect wasn't there. Well, that would have been extremely awkward.
Awkward is the understatement of the century.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But the necessity test that actually legitimizes the arrest in the first place, part of that is, do you expect a suspect to flee if they know that they're under investigation? If somebody has the resources and the capability of doing that and they're pre-warned in advance, then obviously you've kind of set up that necessity test for you. You don't want anybody to know in advance. Also, one of the necessity tests is there any chance that evidence will be concealed, lost, altered or destroyed? That is a really kind of important test because, of course, in a case like this, you're after evidence that could easily be disposed of quickly if you know somebody is coming. That's the reason for that many officers and that kind of search. And I strongly predict people were going, well, that's a bit of overkill, isn't it? And 8 officers and an arresting officer and 4 cars. And so, no, they're there to search a large property as quickly as possible and get the job done. That's a pretty standard number of officers to go and search. I think it's a 5-bedroom property of some size. That's probably underkill and will probably take them quite some time to have done that job.
The King released a statement a couple of hours after news of the arrest came out. He said, I have learned with deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office. What now follows is the full, fair and proper process by which this issue was investigated in the appropriate manner and by the appropriate authorities. In this, as I have said before, they have our full support and cooperation. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. It's quite a statement.
Well, there you go. It is quite a statement. I didn't know he'd made that statement, and that's exactly what I would have expected. And not only, the irony of that statement in some respects is there is only one person above the law in this country, and that's the King, the head of state. So the reality being is, although in some respects it's a brave decision by Thames Valley because this is the arrest of a very, very high-profile figure, first time in 400 years. But actually, it's not it would have been a braver decision in some respects not to arrest.
Yeah, I was thinking
Because
that.
the most important thing here is that nobody is seen because of their position in society to be above the law.
Yeah.
The police, the classic expression developed by Peel nearly 200 years ago was police must act without fear or favour, irrespective of the person they're investigating. That is what Thames Valley are doing. Well done, Chief Constable.
Yeah, and that's something that the Met were actually accused of when they the detectives politely knocked on the door of Peter Mandelson for similar allegations of misconduct in public office, which again surfaced in the Epstein Files. Let's get into that a bit.
Yeah, I strongly suspect they didn't warn him they were coming, though.
No, they wouldn't.
Yeah.
They wouldn't. And listen, I certainly didn't feel that, but that's what a lot of people were saying, and it's something that I talked about with Lewis on that podcast that we did about Peter Mandelson, where do police treat different people differently?
And we certainly have done in the past, but normally it's a nervousness about how the reputation of police here is going to be affected by what they do.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about, for instance, one of the most popular people in the country who is subject to an allegation, and you go around and you look like you're making a heavy-handed arrest and none of those necessity principles apply, we would quite rightly get accused of abuse of authority. So there's always a decision. The decision is always made on a case-by-case basis.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Hey, well, welcome to being a police officer.
Yeah, exactly. So the usual process, Neil, is that a suspect led into the custody suite, booked in, led to a police cell, just 4 walls, a small bed, a pillow if they're lucky, and a small toilet. Is that what Andrew's doing now?
Not necessarily. I mean, that is a standard process for the processing of any prisoner, while various arrangements are made to get lawyers there if they want a lawyer, either a duty solicitor or their own lawyer. I strongly suspect Andrew has his own legal counsel who will be on their way to the station. They probably would have called those from their house, so they'd probably be at the station waiting when Andrew gets there. He may be led into an interview room and have a private consultation with his lawyer before then preparing for the interview. There's nothing to say that at any point he would necessarily have been left in a cell, but that's not because he's Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. There may have been no necessity for that if the whole process is set up to interview him there and then. Yeah,
and we now get on to where we go next, really. I mean, Prince Andrew will be interviewed by detectives. They then have 24 hours, the police this is, to decide whether to bring a charge or to bail someone pending investigations. Now, without going into details of
this
case,
can extend that time.
They can. So a senior investigating officer can extend that for another 12 hours to 36 hours.
They have to apply
and then the magistrates get involved if it's any more than that.
Just in case our listeners are ever in this position, and we know we've had a few people with a interesting previous history who listen to us.
Ex-lawyers, basically. Current lawyers.
The SIO can't make that decision for themselves. They have to apply to an inspector in the first instance to extend for 12 hours,
yes,
then a superintendent to extend for a further 24 hours, and then they have to go before a judge to a maximum of 96. The reason why that could happen, I mean, normally that happened in my cases investigating things like homicide or terrorism, but unusually misconduct in a public office, which has been on the books for very many years, is considered such an important public crime of seriousness that its ultimate sentence carries a life sentence, and therefore it fits the criteria for extending detention to a very long period of time if necessary. I doubt it. They'll be well prepared for this interview.
It's not going to happen.
Depending on what the suspect says, then. But I'd find it very surprising that they would need to extend for that period of time.
The offence here is misconduct in public office, and just on whether he's going to get bailed or not. It is very normal for this offence, especially when further evidence needs to be examined for a suspect to be bailed within the 24 hours. And that is the most likely outcome in this case, you assume.
Of course it is. I mean, I'd find it unlikely that there'd be a position in which they would be going to ask for the custody sergeant for bail to be refused. There are serious conditions for that. I can't see any of them applying here. I mean, one of them is a potential flight risk or the interference with evidence, etc. I don't think that's going to be the case here. Also, I've said that there's a life imprisonment, but the reality for misconduct in a public office is that even if you get to the point, and bear in mind he's innocent till proven guilty, and this is the investigation, on average you're talking of somewhere between if custodial, 2 to 6 years is as a kind of average, 2 to 6, 2 to
Yeah,
7.
a lot of people are thrown, aren't they, by that it carries a potential whole life sentence,
Yeah.
but that's really for an act of treason.
This was developed way back in the day when public officials were, it was considered necessary to keep public trust and confidence in public officials to make this the most serious of offences. It's been around for a very long time. Technology in the world has moved on, and this offence is a really difficult offence to prove.
Well, this
is
a
very high bar.
You ask any detective, they say that misconduct in public office is probably one of the hardest offences to prove in a court of law. Why is that?
Well, it's a very nebulous offence. I mean, if I punch you in the face or steal your phone or steal your car. I'm not annoyed with you that much yet, but that's a very easy offence to prove in comparison, because there is a codified statute that says this is exactly what this offence is. Misconduct in a public office hasn't been codified in that way. It's been kept deliberately vague, because what you don't want to do is wrap everyone up who makes decisions or does things in the normal course of their business or with their normal discretion that might fall within this. In other words, you don't want to criminalise a lot of innocent behaviour as well, but also what you don't want to do is narrow it down so much that you can't take a public official, call them to account for something they've done. So they've left it purposefully wide. And the reason I've said that is many times the law has tried to codify this offence and to stop it being so vague and to stop the bar being so high. And they've never actually managed to come up with an offence that fit all possible permutations of a public official behaving badly. So let's just talk about those points to prove then. I mean, some of them are relatively easy. So the first one, were you in public office at the time and were you acting to your duty in that public capacity? That's a very easy thing to prove.
Well, that's a tick on this one, isn't it?
Well, it is. And all it would require is a statement from the person who appointed him and a statement about what the responsibilities were. And
when he was trade envoy between the years of 2001 and 2011.
So that's pretty easy. The next one, harder, willful misconduct by either neglect of your duty, your public duty, or an action you take.
Willful, that's the word, isn't it?
So this is where it starts to get more complicated, because willful
How do you prove that?
Yeah, well, this is the third point. It's got to be deliberate. Willful is deliberate. It can't be stupid, reckless, or just poor judgment. It has to be an act that is, and this is the really difficult thing, a severe abuse of public trust. Yeah. So whatever you've done, is the impact of it and the seriousness of it such that that public duty holder would be effectively destroyed reputationally, but also the reputation of their department, potentially the state. In other words, have you abused public trust so much? And the fourth one, and this is the one where obviously this is up to the defendant, now if they want to say why, is what was the reasonable excuse or justification if you say you've done nothing wrong? And you had that debate with Lewis over Peter Mandelson, who said, I don't believe I've done anything wrong. Yeah. So this is quite often where a public official will say, hang on, I've got the discretion. This is just a normal part of my job. This is what I'm paid to do. I was doing something because I needed advice. I was doing something because I have the discretion in my job to do this. And this is the irony of this is the more senior you are, the harder this offence is to prove, because normally in your day job you have much more discretion than a junior member of staff who will have lots of rules and policies and procedures to follow, whereas you might have tremendous discretion to do whatever it is you've done. And effectively you need a statement that covers all of those particular issues. And particularly on the stuff that he is alleged to have given to Epstein, we've got there's an email chain of evidence there. You talked about this with Lewis, the chain, and we talked about this on an episode recently. The chain of custody. You have to prove that it's genuine. You have to prove that it's not fake. It's not been manipulated. It's not been. So you have to prove that that's happened, but you have to prove the information that he has told another party was confidential, so there has to be something about that. The fact that it's actually been shared, so it's gone from point A to point B and it's been received by somebody who wasn't authorised to receive it. Again, it was shared without any authority whatsoever, so is it classified, is it sensitive? And most importantly, as we said, that he did it intentionally, or he was reckless knowing that he was under a duty to the public not to do that.
Yeah, and in an investigation like this, when do you think they would have decided to make the arrest? Is this something that they would have decided last night? Or is this, what's the process? Would they have consulted the CPS before this? Would they have consulted other agencies, other forces?
Well, I know what I would have done as a senior
What would you have
investigating
done?
officer, so I wouldn't have decided it last night. So this will have been planned meticulously in advance. It will have been on the basis that look at the allegation that's been made, look at the evidence that is currently available to support that allegation, which is effectively a bunch of redacted emails. Is that good enough to get my reasonable grounds to suspect this person has committed an offence? Provided I've got to that point, given the seriousness of the offence and the fact that this is going to be an international case, I probably would have phoned up the most senior person I knew at the Crown Prosecution Service and said, any chance of a bit of informal
guidance,
advice on this? The Crown Prosecution Service lawyer would have gone, are you joking? You can have some formal advice, but best you write to me in detail and tell me what it is you think you've got. And then they will write back saying, this is what I think you've got. You still need to prove these points. We've just been through those. But in my view, there is enough here to need to interview and question this person in order to progress the investigation.
And let's face it, this would have gone to the very top of the CPS, right?
Well, that CPS lawyer. So if I was the senior investigating officer, my boss would know about this. And we've talked about the hierarchy of policing before. But in any normal constabulary like Thames Valley, there are 9 ranks between a constable and a chief constable. Senior investigating officer will be a chief inspector, so they're on rank number 4. Every single rank above that chief inspector will have had something to do with this, in my view. And it will be the same in the CPS. If Stephen Parkinson, the Director of Public Prosecutions, hasn't had a call from a senior lawyer saying, did you know Thames Valley are about to arrest Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor on his birthday tomorrow morning? I'll eat this triangular table in front of me.
Well, indeed. And a lot of people as well will be asking, because really all the allegations against Andrew all started about 6 years ago, and it started unravelling 6 years ago in that infamous interview with our agent's colleague, Emily Maitlis. And that was all really about sexual misconduct, sexual offences. People will be asking, well, why is he not being arrested for that? These are completely separate investigations going on. And I don't know about you, but it's the first time I've heard 8 different forces investigating one single person for a whole number of different allegations and offences. Is this the most complicated investigation into one person ever?
No. So there are plenty of occasions. So, I mean, no, but I can understand why somebody who isn't involved in this kind of world would think that. It is very common in criminality today. All kinds of crimes cross borders, both within a country and internationally. And very often you have to coordinate investigations with multiple jurisdictions. So what commonly happens is the force that is responsible for investigating an offence is where the offence took place.
Yeah, exactly.
Not where it was reported,
No.
not where the suspect is currently residing. It is where the offence took place. And if those offences take place in multiple jurisdictions, you end up with multiple senior investigating officers investigating the same offence or a similar offence by the same person. You don't want to get that wrong. You want coordination between those senior investigating officers. So what will normally happen is there are various levels of there are various levels of detective, levels 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4th is the highest level of trained detective, normally a senior investigating officer who is trained to conduct that coordination across multiple offences, across multiple boundaries. And they are the people who sit at the top of the tree. And I think, I may have heard last week, the chair of National Police Chiefs Council discussing that they have set up that body to coordinate these investigations.
And also National Crime Agency involved as well, and they're very experienced at dealing with different
the National Crime Agency will also have a senior investigating officer who I know very well, who is outstanding, who is that level 4 trained professional investigation program level 4 trained senior detective, whose job it is to advise police forces on the most complex and serious investigations, including serial investigations, of which that's what we're describing here.
She would talk a bit more about the arrest process, because people are fascinated with this. When a suspect comes into the custody suite, every suspect nowadays is swabbed, their DNA taken, and a police mugshot. He's gone through all that this morning on his birthday as well.
He should have done, yeah. Well, that would be normal process and procedure,
Yeah. What an extraordinary moment.
I imagine that was quite humbling for him, you would hope.
Humbling for him, yeah. And But also, like, when you're a police officer, what's it like when you have someone who is so high profile, and the whole eyes of the world will be on the room that you are in,
Well, those
or
kind of
wanting to know what's going on in those four walls?
Well, definitely. I mean, we've talked about that before. If you're an SIO and you have a very high-profile investigation, there's a great deal of additional stress that comes from the scrutiny that isn't just your boss. The entire world's looking at you. So there's that. But the reality is that's what you're trained for. And what we're describing are absolutely routine procedures that all of the police officers involved in an investigation like this will have done hundreds and hundreds of times.
Exactly. And
Basically, they'll put that behind them until they're at home tonight, sitting in front of their family with a mug of steaming tea going, oh my God, what just happened?
I think it'll be more like a big scotch, actually, rather than a mug of steaming tea.
I was trying not to betray one of my hobbies, but yes, you might be right.
It's just, I'm just fascinated by this because, and also the officers will be going out of their way to treat him like any other person. They will just be treating him like anyone else.
Well, I'd hope
Excuse
so.
me, sir, could you, this way, sir, we need to take a swab. What I'm going to do to you now is this is going to go in the inside of your mouth. All this stuff, right?
I'm laughing because there'll be plenty of criminals listening to this going, so when I was arrested, they didn't treat me with that kind of civility.
Well, sure, yeah.
I really want to hope that they would be treating the person with respect and politeness and civility, because we've talked about this before as well. If you're a detective and you're about to interview someone, the last thing you want to do is tune them up. You want to treat somebody with respect because you want them to talk to you.
Mm. So let's look at what next, really. And we touched on it earlier, but really, this is the beginning of a very long process. This could take, we're talking months before all this stuff is analysed, and the toing and froing between the Department of Justice. That's the added complication here. In reality, the most likely outcome is that he will be bailed today, and police will analyse all the evidence that they have gathered in the 2 searches today. That could take a while.
Yeah, I mean, it could. I mean, we don't know. Days, weeks, months, depends how far they've got so far. But you described it with Lewis in terms of the Mandelson investigation. There's a process to be gone through to get original evidence from the states as well. There's a process to be gone through in terms of forensically to ensure that the evidence that you're looking at is genuine. And I've just described the number of statements that are required from some very senior people who will be thinking very long and hard before they put pen to paper about signing their statements about what they want to do, and they might not necessarily want to cooperate. I find that very difficult to believe, but at the end of the day, the regular criminal justice process, and it won't be because it's Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, it would just be the regular process to do this properly, given the seriousness of the allegation, to make sure that you are trying very hard as the senior investigating officer to prove or disprove the allegations. Remember, innocent till proven guilty. No senior investigating officer, whether they're going through a door with an arrest team or interviewing you under caution in a police station, is there to do anything other than try and get to the truth and gather the evidence and to prove whether the allegation is true or false. Let's not rush them. Let's give them the time to do their job properly.
Well, let's leave it there, Neil. And sorry to get you in on a day off. But,
well, whatever happens, we'll be back to this at some point.
Well,
we'll probably be dragging me in. Just make sure it's not off a Caribbean golf course.
I'll try not to next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of The Crime Agents. We'll be back next week. Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.